All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a few moments to introduce our next speaker. So with us today, we have Bob Coates. He is the Governor Census Liaison, and he works for the Department of Demographic and Economic Analysis in the North Carolina Office of State Budget and Management. As we were thinking about our SGA conference, we always try to find critical topics that affect not only our state but our local communities. And with this year being a census year, we definitely sought out to bring in the state's expert on what the census means for North Carolina, your local communities, as well as our colleges and to you. And so with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Coates to give us an update on not only the state of the census in North Carolina, but what we can do as SGA leaders to help encourage and motivate our students, faculty, and staff to complete the census. Mr. Coates.
Thank you very much, Dr. Evans. Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, fantastic. I'm going to turn my camera on just for a second so y'all can see that I did actually remember to wear a tie today like Dr. Evans. But the important thing is not that you see me, but that you see our slides. So let me turn that off and I'll go right to the presentation. And I'll just go ahead and let you know a little bit about myself. So I am Bob Coates. I'm the Governor's Census Liaison, which just means that I'm a point of contact between the U.S. Census Bureau and the Governor's Office, covering all operations having to do with the census in the state of North Carolina. I'm also the coordinator for the North Carolina State Data Center Network. And for folks who are using the data, consuming data throughout the decade, the State Data Center Program is a network of 45 agencies. Those are the local councils of government. They're the research universities. They're large public libraries. They are the larger chambers of commerce for the cities in the state. These folks are here to help you make sense of all the census data that's coming out. So whether you're doing a research project, whether you're just interested in what's going on with your community, if you'd like some information or if you'd like to get more understanding of census data, I'd encourage you to contact your local state data center affiliate agency, and they're scattered across the state. So let's take a little bit of time to talk about what's going on with North Carolina. So right now, these are estimates that came out from the U.S. Census Bureau in December of last year. So as you can see, North Carolina has about 10.4 million people. That makes us the 9th largest state in the nation. But what you may want to keep an eye on over on the right-hand side is the number of growth or the rate of growth. So we are actually the 3rd fastest growing state in the nation, only behind Texas and Florida. So we're a very dynamic state. We're growing very strongly. Our net growth is about 113,000 people per year. That's about the size of High Point. So we're growing by the size of High Point every year. And we have been doing that for about the past 20 to 30 years. So that nature of growth is not consistent. So we need to know the people who are moving into North Carolina, and the biggest majority of our population growth have been people from other states moving into North Carolina and people from overseas moving into North Carolina. So having a picture of what the nature of that growth means is important to future planning. It's important to make sure that the infrastructure of the state can support that growth. And the numbers that are coming in tell us what we need to be doing to plan for the future of our state. So if a larger percentage of our folks moving into North Carolina are retirees, 65 and over, what do we need to be doing to meet their needs? If they're young professionals that are moving into our state for career opportunities, how do we need to meet those needs? If they're young parents with young children, what do we need to be thinking about in terms of school planning, classroom size, after school programs? So understanding the nature of the change of our state is critical to our future, and that's really what the census is all about. So by now, I hope everyone has heard that this is a census year. In fact, Census Day was just last week, April 1st. But as we go through these next slides, I want everyone to remember that April 1st is just a reference day. It's a reference point for how you fill out your census form. It's not the deadline. You can still be counted. So if you haven't completed your 2020 census as you're home on quarantine, this would be a great time to fill it out. But the census is underway right now, and it's not done. So there's still opportunities to participate. So why do we care about the census? What is it, and what does it mean in North Carolina's communities? Well, first of all, the census is required by the U.S. Constitution. I believe the requirement is the sixth sentence in the Constitution. So the founding fathers thought this was very important. The census is required to be done every 10 years to count the resident populations of the states. And that's done to determine where representative seats in the U.S. House of Representatives should be allocated. So seats in the House don't go to the size of the state geographically, they go to where the people live. So the task of the census is to count everyone, every resident, once, only once, and in the right place. So that's the point, that's the task that's going on right now. So it determines our representation. North Carolina is in a very good position to gain at least one more seat in the House of Representatives, provided that everyone in North Carolina is counted. Another key component of the census is the largest peacetime mobilization the United States government does. This is the biggest operation, the biggest footprint that the nation does outside of wartime. And because of that, because this is the biggest, most complete picture we get at a very small geographic level of what our communities look like, there are a lot of federal programs that rely on census data to be the foundation for how we distribute funds. So in fiscal year 2015, the economic impact of the census just in North Carolina was about $1,623 per person per year in federal funds. Now, those are your tax dollars that you've already paid. These aren't new taxes. But if you don't fill out your census form, that $1,623 that you've already paid is going to be spent in a different community. So being counted on the census helps bring those dollars and cents back to your community for things like healthcare, school lunch programs, highway development, infrastructure maintenance. So all of these are dollars and cents that come back to your community to work for your needs, provided that you're counted. Now, on top of that $1,623 in federal funds, the state of North Carolina apportions about $200 per person per year in state funds. That's things like state sales taxes. They get reverted back to communities based on their population. Powell bill expenditures for transportation. Those are tied to your census count in some way, shape, or form. So the economic impact of the census to our communities is about $1,800 to $1,900 per person per year. And remember, the census is only done once every 10 years. So if you get missed on the census year, that's $1,623 per person. That's actually $16,000 per person because you won't get another chance to be counted for another 10 years. So the economic impact for the census is very, very big. And as I mentioned at the beginning, when we were talking a little bit about the growth of North Carolina, the changing face of North Carolina, this is the big snapshot that we get a chance to take once every 10 years. And this is really the data that local planners rely on for planning for new school construction, for new hospital construction, for widening roads, for expanding water and sewer systems. Businesses also use this data to determine where are we going to build grocery stores. Population has grown. There's now 30 miles between grocery stores. Maybe we need to add a new grocery store here. Businesses are also looking at what's our employment base going to look like. If we do open a new store in this area, what's our possible labor force pool look like? What does our market look like? And the Census Bureau can provide that information. The census provides that data. So as we just talked about, here's some very much tip of the iceberg examples of how census data is used. One of the groups of population that tend to be missed at a higher rate than other groups are preschool-aged children. Even in households that complete their census form, they may not count the young children in the house. Now, maybe that's just wishful thinking because kids are making a lot of noise, but it's important to remember that everybody in the household counts. So if we miss children, preschool-age children, then 5 years from now, we'll find out that we have overcrowded classrooms. Maybe we don't have enough teachers to serve the need because we didn't get a good picture. We didn't get a good picture of what our preschool-age children look like. Service audience. as I mentioned earlier, if we've got a lot of senior citizens moving into the state, relocating here for retirement purposes, if we don't do a good job of counting that population, we're not going to have the services in place to meet their needs. That's true of seniors who are retiring here, young professionals moving in, looking for jobs, really anyone. So the census can inform us on who our service audiences are and how we can best be prepared to meet their needs. And also infrastructure workloads we've talked about, the water, sewer systems, electricity, roads and highways. All of those are impacted by the people who are in the community using those resources. And the census tells us who those communities are, what that population looks like. Now we're in a unique situation now with the COVID-19 impacts. And unfortunately, that brings up a very critical component of census data, that the census data serves our communities in times of emergencies. Now, I'm physically housed in the Office of State Budget and Management, and my section especially was heavily engaged with the Hurricane Florence recovery, and we relied on census data to tell us how many people lived in the flooded areas of the storm impact areas. How many people in those areas had mobility limitations and were going to need emergency assistance to get out of those areas? How many jobs were impacted by the storm? How many people didn't speak English as a primary language in the path of the storm? So what kind of language support were we going to need to get people help and get them out of the area of the storm? Those same questions are being asked about the COVID impact right now. We know that COVID tends to impact folks who are older, 65 and over. So the census data is influencing our analysis and assessment of where our at-risk areas are within the state. But I want to point out again that while the census data is a key component of our planning and response to these emergencies, it's only as good as people's responses and participation to the census. So if we as a state do a bad job in participating in the 2020 census that's going on right now, we're going to have bad data to meet these emergency needs for the next decade. So it's just another example of how census data serves our communities and how important it is that all of our communities participate with the census. So let's take a second to talk a little bit about what the census is. It's not something that happens every day. It happens only once every 10 years. Obviously, folks are very, very busy, so they're going to have questions about what the census is. They may not be familiar with the operation, and they may have some misconceptions. So all of us can have a role to play in spreading facts about the census and dispelling myths about the census. So let's take a few minutes to talk about that. First, all the information on the census is self-reported information. No one is going to tell you how old you are, what gender you are, what race you are. All the information that's reported on the census is reported by you. So you get to tell your community, the federal government, who you are. Nobody's going to define that for you. Second, the census is a federal government operation, and it's a big federal government operation. But we don't participate in the census because it's a big U.S. operation. We participate in the census because it has an even bigger impact locally. Participating in the census, as we've already discussed, brings a lot of dollars and cents back to meet the needs of your community, but it also provides the information that your community is going to need to plan for future growth and meet any emergencies that come up. So we count in the census not because the United States says be counted, not really because North Carolina says be counted. We count because our county, our city, our neighborhood needs that information. So stand up and be counted. It's also important to point out that this is probably one of the most democratic, if not the most democratic operations that the U.S. government does. We can talk about voting, and yes, there's an election coming up later this year, but not everyone can vote. You have to be a certain age. You have to be registered. We can talk about driver's license. You have to be a certain age. You have to pass a test to get a driver's license. But everyone counts on the census. It doesn't matter how old you are or young you are. If you're a newborn baby, you count on the census. Doesn't matter what language you speak. Doesn't matter where you're from. If you happen to be from California, but you're in North Carolina now, you count in North Carolina now. If you're from Spain and you're in North Carolina now, you count in North Carolina now. So it doesn't matter who you are or where you're from, your household makeup. If you're in North Carolina, you count for the census. The next thing to point out is census data is confidential. Now, what does that mean? The census is governed by Title 13 of the U.S. Code. And Title 13 says any information that you as an individual provide to the U.S. government, to the U.S. Census Bureau, cannot be shared. This is your personal information, your name, your race, your age. That information cannot be shared with any other government organization, not the IRS, not immigration, not law enforcement of the courts, not even with your parents. They can't share your personal information to anyone for 72 years, and that's codified by Title 13 of the U.S. Code. Now, if anyone does violate that code, if they share your information, even with someone within the Census Bureau inappropriately, the penalties are pretty severe. Anyone violating Title 13 confidentiality can be fined up to $250,000 and or 5 years in federal prison. And those penalties are spelled out on the back of every census worker's ID badge. So they take confidentiality very seriously. So you can rest assured that when you provide your basic information on your census form, no one is going to see it for 72 years. So right now, the latest census data that you can see is from the 1940 census, and in 2022, the 1950 census data will be released. So if you're doing your family histories, you can find that data when it's released from the National Archives. Now, this slide was originally done a while back where I could say the census is coming soon, but the reality is the census is here now. So we know that the census is very important to our communities and to the future of our state. So the question now is, how do we make the census a success for us? It's a challenge for all communities, and the COVID situation has not made data collection for the census any easier. So we want to make sure that everyone knows that this is census time, that everyone counts. There are ways to count that are safe and secure. You can be counted in the safety of your own home while maintaining a social distance. So we want to make sure that everyone knows it is important that you are safe, but it's also important that you be counted. So I'm giving you this slide because this was the original pre-COVID timeline. The important thing to point out is, yes, COVID has had a huge impact on all of our lives and on a lot of operations that are going on with the census, but it hasn't changed the basic role and the basic rules on which the census operates. So the initial census mailings went out in mid-March, the week of March 12th, just about the time most folks were being told to go home. Census Day is the reference day for answering your census questionnaires, and that's April 1st. That was last week. Again, it's not the deadline. It's simply the reference point. So where your usual place of residence is, where you usually live on April 1st, that's where you should be counted for the census. By law, total state populations must be reported to the president by December 31st of this year. So that's the what we call the apportionment release of the census. It's just total state populations. And at that time, we'll find out if North Carolina gained another seat in the House or not. The following spring, April of 2021, redistricting data is due to be released to all the states. This is the very detailed census data down to very small levels, and these are the tools that the North Carolina General Assembly will use to redraw voting precincts and districts in the state of North Carolina. This will also be the first time that counties and cities and neighborhoods see what their official census counts are. That's going to be in the spring of 2021. Now, at that same time, there are going to be plenty of local leaders that say, we think the Census Bureau did a bad job. We think these numbers are wrong. And there will be a challenge period that's available only to local leaders and tribal leaders that starts in the spring of 2021 when those data are released. That will last for about 2 to 3 years. And at the end of that challenge period, the Census Bureau will redraw metropolitan statistical areas. And those are larger areas, geographic areas built around larger municipalities, like the Triangle, the Triad, Charlotte. And those metro areas will be redefined in 2023. And that will roughly close the book on the 2020 census cycle. Now, that was the original timeline, and then COVID showed up. So let's talk a little bit about what has changed because of COVID. First, the self-response period, and that's what we are all operating under. This is the first census, the 2020 census, is the first census to allow people to use the internet to respond to their census. That doesn't, and because the internet is available now, it doesn't mean that the older versions of participating have gone away. So you can participate at home on either the internet or your smartphone, or you can call your information in and be counted over the phone. Or you can use the traditional paper form. All of those are still available. But the window to self-respond has been extended into mid-August. Now, I do want to take a quick moment here just to say, as we're talking about adjusted timelines, some of these timelines are still flexible and they may be extended even further depending on how the COVID situation evolves. But for right now, the self-response rate, the self-response window has been extended to August 14th, and that was from July 31st. I just noticed a typo here. The mobile questionnaire assistant, that should be mobile, not mobile. Mobile questionnaire assistance has been extended. That's going to run from April 13th through August 14th. That's your opportunity. If you have questions on how to fill out a certain question on your census form, what's the difference between origin and race? There will be a phone number where you can call, and there'll be a census staff member who can explain, can give you some pointers on how you should answer that question in a way that's most appropriate to you. Now, the next two items, early non-response follow-up and non-response follow-up and re-interview, that's the more traditional, what we think about the census workers going door to door. Those are going to be the census workers that go to those households that didn't respond to their census, and they'll be knocking on doors trying to get complete responses. Now, those obviously have been delayed because of COVID. In fact, all field operations for the Census Bureau have been suspended for at least 2 weeks, and there was a slight increase of that delay about a week ago. So the Census Bureau doesn't want to send census workers out into the community until the COVID situation has begun to tail off a little bit. Some of these dates may change, but the idea is that there will be census workers going into the communities at some point trying to collect non-response information, and these are the tentative dates for that. Now, I've provided a link on this slide to the U.S. Census Bureau's newsroom website. That's the best location to go to see new updates as they happen regarding timeline. Now, I do want to stress that these are changes to the actual timeline. It doesn't change the rules on which the census operates. So that self-response being counted where you usually live. If you were a college student living in a dorm and you would normally be at the dorm on April 1st, you should be counted at the dorm. And the colleges and universities are providing that information to the Census Bureau. If you lived in an apartment near campus on April 1st, but you've gone home because of COVID, you should be counted at that apartment and not at home. So I just want to stress that those residency rules and the operational rules of the Census Bureau have not changed because of COVID. Now, the group quarters timeline, this is kind of what we were just talking about. Group quarters is a census term that refers to long-term resident situations that are different from where you might be living at other points of time. So college dorms, nursing homes, military barracks, prisons, these are all examples of group quarters. And group quarters counts. Those population, everyone counts. It doesn't matter your resident situation. In fact, even if you're homeless, you still count for the census. So the Census Bureau made advanced contacts in early February through early March with those group quarters to determine how they were going to count the populations at those facilities. That operation went on as scheduled. The service-based enumeration, that's actually the process to make an attempt at counting the homeless population, going to soup kitchens, going to homeless shelters, and even counting the homeless in the street. That operation has been delayed a month and will be happening at the end of April, the first part of May. The enumeration of transitory locations, that's going to be halfway houses, or if there are maybe campgrounds, trailer parks, things like that, where it's a transitory or more mobile population situation. Those people will also be counted, but that counting window has been moved back. And the group quarters enumeration in general has been moved back to April 16th through June 19th. Again, everyone counts, so when in doubt, please make an effort to make sure that you're counted. We recognize that there are going to be some cases where people may be counted twice. If you are counted at your college dorm, but you're home now with your parents and you're going to be counted at their home, the Census Bureau has processes available on the back end to remove duplication. So my piece of encouragement to everyone is make sure that you're counted. If you happen to get counted twice, the Census Bureau will sort that out on the back end. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the COVID outbreak and safety with the census. So the census is still happening in the midst of all the COVID situation. Plenty of things have been delayed. I know lots of us are home, self-quarantined, and that's a good thing. But the Census Bureau the census is still happening, and it's still very important. So while the timelines have changed, the important thing to remember is that you can still be counted, and you can still be counted safely in your home. You can use the internet, you can use the telephone, or you can use the paper form. And I should point out that as part of the regular mailing cycle, there's a mailing cycle that's going to happen. Sorry about that. There's a mailing cycle that's going to happen later this week, beginning on the 8th and running for another week, where those households that have not responded, everyone will be mailed a paper form. So if you haven't received a form yet, it is coming in the mail if you choose to fill out paper. You don't have to wait for that. You can go online and be counted through the internet right now without waiting. And that website is my2020census.gov. There's language support there too. So if you'd like to fill the online form out in Russian, that's available, or Spanish, or whatever your preferred language is. There are 12 languages that are supported online. And the Census Bureau provides our phone support in over 70 languages. So there's plenty of support if you need help in a different language. The important thing here to remember with the COVID situation is the sooner you complete your form, the more likely you are not to be visited by a census worker. The longer you wait, the more likely you are to be visited by a census worker. And that, again, puts them at risk by being out in the community, puts you at risk. So the safest thing you can do is make sure that you and everyone in your household is counted early. And the sooner you complete your form, that maximizes the likelihood that no census worker will come to your door. Okay, now, as I mentioned, this is the first census where the internet is an option for responding to the census. And that's great for most folks. The internet's a very common tool today. However, when we look at the state of North Carolina, we see that it's not an even distribution of internet access across our state. In fact, about 700,000 households in North Carolina, according to data released last December, do not have internet access at home. And this shows that number isn't evenly distributed across the state. So the challenge there to make sure that everyone was counted is that we were going to rely on our public libraries, community centers that did have internet access, and they were going to open their resources to the folks in their community that didn't have the internet. And then COVID-19 showed up and libraries and community centers are closed. So this is presenting a challenge to us. If we look at, these are the census response rates as of April 1st that were released through the census tracker, and you'll see at the bottom of this slide there's a link. This map is updated every day. So if we look at this slide at the response rates, North Carolina was lagging behind the national response rate by about 3 points. And if we back up to the internet response map or the internet access map, we'll see that a lot of those counties that don't have internet access at home tend to be the counties that are lagging behind on internet response or on census response. So we recognize that the internet challenge is there, but this is part of the reason that the Census Bureau has expanded the self-response window. Another issue that's going on here is there are areas in North Carolina that do not receive their mail at their address. Their mail only comes to a P.O. box. And the census cannot use a P.O. box location to count people because no one actually lives at the P.O. box. Remember, the point of the census is to make sure that everyone is counted in the right place so that political voting precincts and political boundaries can be set. So the operation to connect a census form with those addresses where people usually get their mail through P.O. box involves sending census workers out to hang questionnaires on doorknobs. And those census workers are being told to stay home right now until COVID passes. So a lot of the non-response that we're seeing on this map are areas where people have not received a questionnaire yet because census workers have not been allowed to go out into the field. So as you're talking with family and friends, complete strangers, if you're talking to folks, you have the opportunity to bring up why the census matters. You can also let them know, hey, if you haven't received your census form yet, you can go on the internet and respond. If you haven't received it and you don't have internet, a census form is coming to your address, coming to your P.O. box in the next week or so. Please make sure you fill that out. It's very important for the future of all of our communities. Now, the other important thing is we want to make sure that while I know that this is a scary time and everybody's doing their best to make sure their friends, families, and neighbors are getting through this safely, there's also going to be some folks out there that may be trying to take advantage of the situation. And we want to make sure that no one in North Carolina gets scammed by someone pretending to be a census worker. So we had a booth at the North Carolina State Fair last October. And as folks came up, this was a very common question. How am I going to know if the person standing on my doorstep is a census worker? Number one, they're going to have an ID badge that includes their picture with a watermark for the U.S. Department of Commerce on it. The U.S. Department of Commerce is the home agency for the U.S. Census Bureau. There will also be an expiration date on their ID badge. They'll be carrying a census bag, a shoulder bag, carrier bag, and they may be carrying a laptop or a handheld device. If you ask, they are obligated to provide you with either their supervisor's contact information and the regional office phone number so that you can call and verify that this person is who they say they are. They'll also provide a letter from Dr. Dillingham, who's the director of the U.S. Census Bureau, and that will be on Census Bureau letterhead. And if you have any doubts, there's a number in red here. That is the Atlanta Regional Census Office's operations number. All census operations in most of the Southeast states are covered through the Atlanta Regional Office. So if you have a question about this person standing on your doorstep, don't call the sheriff or the police department. They're not going to know if that person is a census worker or not. But this 1-800 number, they will be able to tell you if that person is actually a census worker or not. And here's a great picture of what a census worker will look like. You can see the handheld device, the carrier bag, the ID pinned on the blouse. So those are all key components you should be looking for census workers. The other key component of this slide is the note that participation, everyone counts. So please be sure to let your friends, family, coworkers, everybody know that, hey, the census is coming. Doesn't matter where you're from, doesn't matter your age. It's important that everybody be counted. So no one's too young, no one's too old to be counted in the census. Now, the other key thing to avoiding scams is knowing what the census is going to ask and what the census is not going to ask. So the 2020 census is going to ask only 9 questions, aside from your name. It's going to ask your housing tenure. Are you in an apartment? Are you in a condo? Are you homeless? Do you own or rent? That's the basic housing information. After that, it asks the name, age, race, sex, Hispanic origin or not, and relationship of each person in the household. Every person, even those small children in the household. Now, this relationship question is very important because you can have an apartment where you may have roommates, 4 or 5 people living together, but none of them are related to each other. That one census form is intended to count every person in that apartment, even if they're not related. We're also seeing now that in family households, there's more multi-generational households. You may have children living with mom and dad, and grandma and granddad may have moved in as well. Everyone in the household counts, but that relationship information is critical to identifying the nature of the household. Now, what will the Census Bureau never ask? The Census Bureau is never going to ask for your Social Security number, never ask for bank or credit card numbers, account numbers. They're never going to ask for, never going to ask for money or cash donations, and they'll never ask for anything on behalf of a political party. I wanted to stress these final 4 bullets because each 4 of those have already happened in North Carolina. So remember, the Census Bureau is only going to ask basic housing, age, race, sex, and relationship information, nothing aside from that. Now, we're talking about the 2020 census, and it's important to also note that the Census Bureau is a big organization, and they conduct over 80 surveys. Some of those are annual, some of them are monthly. So some folks may get other surveys from the Census Bureau that may ask different questions, but the once every 10-year census will only ask these basic questions. Now, I want to be able to give you folks a tool so that you can see what will be happening in your communities, in your neighborhoods. How will the census operate? This is a tool from the, you'll see the screen capture says HTC 2020. That's hard to count maps for 2020. The Census Bureau has produced a number of maps letting you know where the at-risk communities are for not being counted in the census. And they've also released some maps showing how the census will be conducted in different communities. This series of maps that you're seeing here comes from the City University of New York. And they've done a good job of kind of compiling all those maps into one given website. So in this case, we're able to zoom into an area and we're able to look at, I just happened to pick a state Senate district. And this shows us how the census will be conducted. The HTC, the hard to count populations, that's information that comes from the Census Bureau where they recognize there are some communities that tend to be missed at a higher rate than other communities in our state. So this tool will also help you zoom into small areas within a county and see where those at-risk areas are. Now, some of the facets that make communities hard to count, if you have a lot of people that have moved within the past year, and remember, we talked about North Carolina growing by about the size of High Point every year, that's a lot of people that are moving into our state and moving around within our state. So people that have moved within the last year tend to be missed at a higher rate. Children under the age of 5 tend to be missed at a higher rate. Households that are experiencing poverty have a hard time being counted on the census. Households where English is not the primary language tend to be missed at higher rates. African American males between the ages of 18 and 35 tend to be missed on the census at a higher rate. Now, this isn't true across every block in the state, but it is generally true about what the census has noticed on how people are missed. So our task is to really loop in as many local heroes as we can to let folks know in their communities, hey, this is really, really important to our future, and it's really, really important that you're counted. And these maps will show you where some of the clusters of those areas are, and we're counting on folks to get the word out to make sure that everyone is counted. Now, this specific map shows greens and purples. The purples are the area where the mailings are going to mailings will go to homes, encouraging them to use the internet to be counted. The areas that are in green would get that same mailing encouraging people to go to the internet and be counted, but they also got a paper questionnaire with that mailing. And the reason is these areas in green have a traditional, the Census Bureau has data to show that traditionally they don't respond well to internet surveys, or they may have older populations that may have difficulty using the internet. So the green areas got a dual mailing saying use the internet or here's a paper form. The purple areas just got the encouragement to use the internet. And the areas that are shaded in deep and dark colors, the dark greens and dark purples, those folks got mailings in both English and in Spanish. The lighter shaded areas only got English only mailings. Again, there's language support in almost 70 languages, and the online language information is available in 12 different languages. But you'll also notice some areas on the map that are gray. Those are areas where the census workers were going to go and hang the questionnaires on the doorknobs. So if you want to see how the census is initially being conducted in your area, you can visit these maps, see what's going on, and know what to expect in your community. Now, I wanted to say something quickly. I know that folks are home, they're streaming videos or watching Netflix. You've probably already seen some streaming ads from the Census Bureau saying, hey, it's time to be counted. If you're chatting with your friends on Facebook or Instagram, you've probably seen some census ads popping up there. This is just a quick slide to let you know that the Census Bureau did hire a national consultant, a national advertising company to handle their outreach. And these are the general phases of outreach. And this is before the COVID hit. So this is just letting you know what to expect from a national level. Plenty of state and local partners are doing their own advertising and outreach. And I would encourage you, if you're talking to friends and neighbors about being counted, be sure to let folks know, localize the message. This is important to our city. It's important to our county. It's important to our neighborhood that folks be counted. That's going to be much more relevant to folks than telling them, hey, the U.S. government wants you to do this. So that's a lot of talk about what's going to happen operationally and what is happening operationally. But let's localize this to you. I know everybody's busy. You've got work, you've got family, you've got kids going on. So how do you find time to make the census work? Well, the easiest thing you can do is you can complete your census form safely and in your home. Here's a screen capture from the online census form. This is at my2020census.gov. Now, if you received a mailing in the mail, it had a code for you to punch in. And you can see the 3 boxes on the form. This is where you put in your census ID. If you lost your form, if you didn't get the form, you don't have to have that code. So you'll see right beneath the code, it says, if you do not have a census ID, click here. That's where you can click and respond online, even if you didn't get a census form. So you can do that right now. You can tell friends and families, complete strangers, go online, fill out your census form. It's very important. Now, we shared some resources. I also am technical staff to the North Carolina Complete Count Commission established by Governor Cooper in October of 2018. There's some great resources available from the North Carolina Complete Count Commission website, and I'm going to share their link with you in just a minute. So go there and find some speaking points or find some graphics that you can put on your social media pages, encourage folks to be counted, make your own TikTok video, slap it on your social media just to raise awareness. All that's great stuff you can do. But if you're kind of old school, and this is something that we've done here in my house, the Complete Count Commission created an I counted sign. It just prints off on a standard 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. So you print off that picture, you stick it in your window of your house. Hey, I was counted. Lets your neighbors know that you've been counted. Lets that census worker know that you've been counted. But it's also sort of a challenge to anybody who comes by. Hey, those people have been counted. Maybe I should look for my census form. Anything that you do to talk about the census, if you want to take a quick picture of a selfie of you completing your census form to put it on your social media, just use hashtag MakeNCCount or @NCCensus, and that'll get picked up by the state's effort to promote what North Carolinians are doing to make sure our communities are being counted. So all of that is kind of really easy, really straightforward, didn't cost you anything. However, and here's a quick picture of the window sign, I counted with the North Carolina in the background. That's available on some of the resource handouts that are attached to today's seminar. So you can grab that and print it off and use it today. So North Carolina has over 100 complete count committees. I mentioned the one that Governor Cooper founded back in 2018, but many local governments, counties, communities, churches, campus organizations, lots of folks have already formed their complete count committees. So if you have more energy, you'd like to get more involved, you can either create your own complete count committee. It's not too late to do that, or you can connect with your local complete count committee. And there's information on how to connect through the North Carolina Complete Count Commission online. You can involve agencies or partners. If we were still working, if you were in your office and there's a cork board in the break area, you can print off a census fact sheet and stick it up there. Right now, as we're emailing everybody, as we're doing social meetings like the one that we're doing right now, you can send a quick email out. On the tagline of my email, I've included a link to the North Carolina Complete Count Commission website with the logo. So every email I send out has a little awareness tag on the bottom of it, even if I'm not talking about the census. So that's very basic stuff that you can do. We've talked about using the MakeNCCount and @NCCensus for social media tagging. And I did mention the census website of censusnc.gov. There are census logos, fact sheets. We've talked some about the economic impact. There's some visualizations on that website that you can download. There's also some quick fact sheets that are geared around each county to show the economic impact, the population breakdown for that county. All of those are available at census.nc.gov. Grab those tools and use them any way you'd like. Here's a quick screen capture of the website, and it's actively being updated even though everyone's working from home. So stop by there and grab any resources that you'd like. And finally, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to email me. That number in red is my office number, and I'm not there. So if you send me an email, I'm much more likely to respond to you more quickly if you shoot me an email. So that's the end of my comments. I would love to hear what questions you have, and I do see some messages that have come in through chat. So if it's okay, I'll start responding to some of those, and if you have more questions, please use the chat window. Question one, what's the state doing to help residents of North Carolina to respond to the 2020 census survey? Number one, we just aired a broadcast on public television to let folks know. It aired on the 2nd, but it's still available through all of the WUNC TV networks to let folks know why the census matters and what they can do to be counted. The other thing that we're doing is we're working with all state partners right now. The briefings that happen on a weekly basis on COVID operations, the same partners that are presenting from the governor's staff there are letting folks know that it's not too late to be counted. We're driving people to the internet. That's the primary contact point. But we also want to let folks know that if you don't have internet at home, or if you just prefer not to use the internet, keep an eye on your mailbox or your PO box for those census questionnaire, the paper forms coming out later this week and the first part of next week. Again, you have until the late part of August to respond, but we want to make sure that folks are counted early so they don't get visited by census workers, just to keep folks safe. Question number two is, when group quarters, including college students at schools, when will they be counted? The actual group quarters enumeration started before COVID hit. So the U.S. Census Bureau worked, remember I mentioned that in early February, they started contacting all group quarters to determine how those populations were going to be counted. 47% of colleges and universities nationwide opted for what's called an e-response method. So the colleges or universities provided a digital response to the Census Bureau about the information for the students that lived on campus in the dorms. 7% nationwide provided a paper response to that Census Bureau request. So the remaining roughly 35% nationally of colleges and universities opted to have census workers come and drop off census questionnaires. College and university staff were going to distribute those questionnaires, and then they were going to provide those back to the Census Bureau. That operation has been heavily impacted by COVID-19. So the Census Bureau is visiting that 35% of the colleges and universities to determine which other operation they can use to count their dorm population that have been relocated because of COVID. So the enumeration of group quarters is still going on. The timeline has been bumped back a little bit. The important thing to know is even those colleges and universities that had planned on using that drop-off pickup operation, they have other options that are in place, and they are working with the Census Bureau right now to make sure their dorm populations are counted as being on campus. Key thing to take away from this is, if you were a college student that didn't live on campus, you were in an apartment, you need to make sure that you were counted at that apartment and not home if you went back home. But when in doubt, make sure that you're counted. Good question. Question number 3, are you obligated to answer all the questions on the census? Is it permitted to omit answers if you do not feel comfortable disclosing certain information? It's a very good question. So census participation is required by law. And you certainly are able to skip a question if you want to. For instance, if you don't want to answer your Hispanic origin question, or you don't want to answer your age question, you can skip that. However, skipping a question puts you at a higher risk of being visited by a census worker later in the operation. The census field workers are tasked with getting complete answers to census forms. So while you can skip an answer, just understand it puts you at a higher risk of being visited. If you don't want to be visited, complete your questionnaire. Another question. How does the census plan on getting the attention of the younger generation? Why can't we do the census every 5 years versus every 10 years? The information should be recent and accurate for grant writing. I absolutely agree with you, and I can tell you a little bit of census history here. I hope I'm not going to bore anybody to sleep on this, but once upon a time in my career with the census, there were 2 forms for the census. Back in 2000, there was a short form that asked 10 basic questions. That went to 5 out of 6 households. There was a long form that asked many more questions that went to 1 out of 6 households. And the purpose behind that was the Census Bureau, being a statistical agency felt like they could take that long form data that was just a sample picture of the community, put it into their statistical models, and come up with a better picture of what our communities look like. Because they know that there are people that are missed, and they know some of the characteristics of those communities that tend to be missed. So that ended up going to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, for the purposes of apportionment, you have to use a complete count, that short form only. So that's why we only have a short form of the census today. That long form of the census became what is now called the American Community Survey. And the American Community Survey samples every month and reports data every year. So the slide that I showed on internet access at home, that's actually data that came from the American Community Survey that was gathered on a monthly basis, and they report every year. So the American Community Survey, produced from the U.S. Census Bureau, will produce data every year. It's much more timely data, and it's a much more broad picture of data. So if you want information about unemployment, earnings, per capita income, disability status, educational attainment, all of that comes from the American Community Survey, and you get it every year. But it is founded on the last census. So the foundation, the estimates that go into the American Community Survey are founded on the last census. So if we do a bad job of the 2020 census, we'll get bad data out of the American Community Survey until 2030. So it's a very good question. There's a lot of data that comes out from the Census Bureau. Some of it is much more timely than the once every 10-year census. However, the once every 10-year census is the foundation that pretty much drives everything else. So we want to make sure we get this right. And if you have questions about getting to some of that more detailed data from the American Community Survey, please contact me or any of your state data center affiliate networks, and they'll be able to help you with that. It's a very good question. Question 5. When will the census information be updated on the census website? And this is another very good question. First of all, if you've been using census data in the past, you may be aware of the American Fact Finder tool. American Fact Finder was retired at the end of March. So there is a new data engine out there known as data.census.gov, and that's the web address. That is the new data tool that the Census Bureau will be using to release all census data from all surveys from this point into the foreseeable future. So the census, the 2020 census data, as it stands right now, the total state populations are due to be released to the president by December 31st. Those total state populations will be available through data.census.gov at that time. In April of 2021, the Census Bureau is obligated to begin flowing out data to states for redistricting. As that data is released, it will show up on data.census.gov so that you can access it online. Now, I say all of that with the caveat that COVID-19 is still out there. There are a number of states who are asking for the Census Bureau to have more time to collect data and to present the best data possible. I think the Census Bureau would love to have more time, but those two dates that I mentioned, December of this year and April of next year, are in federal law. If Congress acts to relax those deadlines, the data from the 2020 census might not be available until a little bit later. That's one of those timelines that are kind of up in the air right now. We just don't know what's going to happen. But as things stand right this moment, total state populations from the 2020 census will be available December 31st online, and the redistricting data will start coming out in April of next year, and that will be available through data.census.gov as well. All very good questions. That's the last of the online questions that I see. So if there are any other questions, please fill them out. Otherwise, thank you so much for your time. Please contact me via email if you have any questions. And I appreciate your time. Please be counted.
Mr. Coates, thank you for your time and expertise today. Before you disappear, there is one more question that popped up. It says, why is the U.S. Census Bureau using the proposed 2020 census to report self-response rates for counties? I'll copy it in case you have a different interpretation of the question. Hold on one second.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think what they're referring to is I showed the map of response rates, self-response rates, and that data is updated online every afternoon. Question, why is the Census Bureau using proposed 2020 census tracks to report self-response rate. Well, there are a number of operations that have gone into effect. So we're in the data collection phase of the 2020 census right now, but we've actually been preparing at the local level to conduct the 2020 census for about 3 to 4 years. And the Census Bureau takes about 12 to 13 years to analyze, plan, and execute a census. So this is something we've been working on for a long time. As part of this preparation, local governments have been asked to verify their corporate boundaries, have municipalities annexed any new land, have towns merged, unincorporated, any of those changes. Those are tracked every year. There is an operation that happens once every 10 years called a Participant Statistical Areas Program. Things like census tracts and block groups are statistical sub-county boundaries that are only defined once every 10 years. And the Census Bureau releases detailed information for those statistical areas once every 10 years. It's a very powerful tool for local planning and emergency management. There are some general guidelines about how those geographic entities have to be created, but local governments have been engaged this year through the PSAP program to recommend any changes to their sub-county statistical areas. And that's what you're seeing reported on the self-response tracker online. Those are the proposed census tracts, which ideally are about 4,000 people in population. That's what you're seeing is those units that have been kind of redesigned through the PSAP program. Once the final program closes, those will be kind of set in place, and those will be the geographic units we'll use for the next 10 years. But right now, they're still kind of considered provisional.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a computer round of applause to Mr. Coates for his time and expertise today. His email and his contact information, as well as some handouts, are in the chat or in the webinar box to download. And Mr. Coates, if you feel comfortable, I can share the presentation that you presented today with our participants as well. And I'll just say thank you again for your time and expertise.
Thank you so much. Please share everything.
Yes, sir. So our next speaker is scheduled for 1 p.m. We tried to schedule in a pseudo lunch break for everyone. And so we'll see you back here in a few moments. Please refill your cup, put some food in your tummy, go use the restroom facilities if you can. Make sure if you're in student government to download those resources so that you can share those electronically with your students, faculty, and staff. And we will see you in just a few moments.